The low rumble of motorcycle engines rolled across the empty stretch of highway just before sunset, echoing off the surrounding hills like distant thunder. A roadside diner sat alone at the edge of the asphalt, neon sign buzzing faintly, windows glowing warm against the cooling air. It was the kind of place people stopped without thinking. A place where time slowed down and no one expected anything unusual to happen. Chrome-covered bikes pulled into the gravel, lot one by one, parking in a loose line. Leather jackets, heavy boots, laughter that carried farther than necessary. A biker crew had arrived, confident, loud, comfortable, taking up space. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere, as if the diner had been warned before anyone even stepped inside. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee, grease, and old wood. A few truckers sat near the counter. A couple shared a booth by the window. Conversations were quiet, routine, forgettable. At a corner table sat an older man alone. He wore a plain denim jacket, faded with time, sleeves rolled casually at the wrists. His posture was relaxed, almost lazy. A cup of black coffee rested near his hand, untouched for several minutes. Chuck Norris sat quietly, not watching anything in particular, just present. No bodyguards, no attention, no sign that he was anyone worth noticing. The diner door swung open. Laughter flooded in first, followed by boots thudding against the floor. Leather creaked as the bikers stepped inside, scanning the room with the casual entitlement of men used to being noticed. Conversations at nearby tables softened, then stopped. Forks paused mid-air. Eyes flicked up, then away. At the center of the group was their leader. Broad shoulders stretched the seams of his jacket. His arms were thick, scarred, confident. His beard was neatly trimmed, his grin easy and practiced. He moved like someone who had never been told no, and if he hadn't listened. They claimed 2 tables without asking. Chairs scraped loudly. One biker slapped the counter and ordered coffee for everyone, his voice carrying over the room. The leader remained standing, scanning faces, absorbing the attention like fuel. That's when his eyes landed on Chuck. The leader paused, just for a moment. He looked at the older man sitting alone in the corner. Calm, unimpressed, seemingly detached from the noise. No reaction, no tension, just stillness. The leader smirked. He leaned toward one of his crew and muttered something under his breath. A few bikers laughed and glanced toward Chuck's table. Another leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching. The leader stepped away from his group and walked slowly across the diner. Each step was deliberate, boots heavy, presence intentional. He stopped beside Chuck's table, looming just enough to make a point. "Evening," he said loudly, making sure the room heard him. "You look pretty solid for your age." Chuck looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, clear, unbothered. He gave a small nod, polite but neutral. "Just enjoying my coffee," he said. The leader chuckled. "Mind if we make things a little more interesting?" He tapped the table with one thick finger. "Arm wrestling, right here." The diner went quiet, every head turned. Even the grill seemed to hiss a little softer. A woman near the counter frowned. A man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A few people instinctively reached for their phones, sensing that something was about to happen. To everyone watching, this looked like a setup. A biker leader embarrassing an older man for fun. A show of dominance. A moment designed to get laughs. Chuck didn't respond right away. He looked down at his coffee, the surface dark and still. The leader leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to feel personal, but still loud enough to be heard. "What's wrong?" he said. "Hollywood muscles only work on camera." A few bikers laughed. Chuck slowly set his cup down. The sound of ceramic touching wood seemed louder than it should have been. He looked up again, expression unchanged. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said calmly. The leader raised an eyebrow. "Not a good idea." He smiled wider. "It's just a friendly match." He slammed his elbow onto the table, planting his arm like it belonged there. "Come on," he said, "unless you're scared." The word hung in the air. Chuck glanced around the diner, at the faces watching, at the phones now clearly recording. At the expectation pressing in from every direction, people weren't just watching him, they were waiting for him to fail. He exhaled slowly. "You should reconsider," Chuck said quietly. The leader laughed sharp and loud. "Is that a threat?" Chuck shook his head slightly. "Number," It's advice. That word did something. The leader's smile flickered, just for a moment, before hardening. You hear that? He said to his crew. The old man thinks he's dangerous. More laughter, louder this time. Forced-known biker pulled a chair closer. Another pushed menus and napkins aside, clearing space. The setup was happening whether Chuck wanted it or not. The tension thickened. Phones rose higher. Red recording lights blinked. Chuck adjusted his chair, slowly. The leader took it as confirmation. That's more like it, he said. But Chuck still hadn't agreed. He looked up at the leader, eyes steady. This ends badly, Chuck said. Not for me. The leader's grin disappeared. Sit down and wrestle, he said, voice lower now, sharper. Or walk out looking like a coward. A woman near the counter shook her head. A man whispered, this isn't right. No one intervened. Chuck stood. The room froze. He removed his jacket carefully, folding it and placing it over the back of the chair. His movements were unhurried, almost ritualistic. Not defensive, not aggressive. The leader smiled again. Now we're talking. Chuck sat across from him but didn't place his arm on the table yet. He looked directly at the leader. This is your choice, Chuck said. The leader didn't answer. He just planted his elbow again and extended his hand. Chuck placed his elbow down. Their hands hovered inches apart. The diner leaned forward as one. No one realized it yet, but the outcome was already decided. Their hands locked. The leader leaned forward aggressively, muscles tense, jaw clenched. Chuck sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed. His shoulders loose, his grip firm but not tight. This isn't about strength, Chuck said calmly. You don't need to do this. The leader scoffed, saved the speech. Chuck adjusted his elbow slightly, aligning it with precision, a subtle movement. Almost invisible, but intentional, the leader noticed. Getting comfortable? Chuck met his eyes. Giving you a chance. For half a second, doubt crept in, then pride crushed it. You think I'm scared of you? The leader said. Chuck said nothing. The diner employee acting as a referee raised his hand, unsure how he'd ended up here. On three, he said. The leader leaned so far forward his chair creaked. Chuck didn't move. 1, 2. Before the count finished, Chuck spoke softly. If you push with force, he said, you'll lose control. The leader laughed. This is real life. Teeth clenched. The table rattled. Chuck's arm didn't move, not a centimeter. The leader blinked, confused. He pushed harder. Nothing. Chuck's wrist stayed straight. His elbow stayed planted. His shoulder absorbed the force like water. The diner went silent. The leader adjusted his grip, twisting, trying to overpower with torque. Chuck's expression didn't change. Confusion turned to frustration. Push! Someone yelled. The leader snarled and gave everything he had. That's when Chuck moved. Not fast. Not violently, just a slight rotation of the wrist. A subtle shift of leverage. Barely visible to the untrained eye. The effect was immediate. The leader's arm stalled, then began drifting sideways. What the... he muttered. Chuck still hadn't tightened his jaw, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't broken a sweat. The leader's breathing grew heavy. His arm trembled, not from weakness, but from resistance. He couldn't understand. He pushed harder. The harder he pushed, the worse it got. Relax, Chuck said quietly. You're fighting yourself. The leader didn't listen. He couldn't. The pressure increased. Not sudden, not brutal. Just steady. Relentless. Chuck adjusted again, redirecting force downward and outward. The table creaked. A sharp sound echoed through the diner. People gasped. The leader's eyes widened. Not from pain, from realization. This wasn't strength versus strength. This was control versus chaos. And chaos was losing slowly, unmistakably. The leader's hand began to tilt. No, he whispered. Sweat dripped onto the table. His jaw trembled. His pride collapsed in real time. You don't have to prove anything, Chuck said, with one final smooth rotation. Chuck finished it. The leader's hand hit the table. Silence. Then the diner erupted. Gasps. Shouts. Phones shaking with disbelief. Chuck released the grip immediately and leaned back. The leader stared at his hand like it didn't belong to him. Someone in the crowd finally spoke. "Do you know who that is?" An older man stepped forward, voice calm. "That's Chuck Norris," he said. "A real martial artist." The leader swallowed. Chuck stood, slipped his jacket on, and reached for his coffee. "I thought you were just a guy," the leader said quietly. "A lot of people do," Chuck replied. The leader extended his hand. This time, not to challenge. Chuck shook it. Outside, engines rumbled to life, quieter now. As Chuck returned to his table, the diner slowly breathed again. The lesson lingered long after the bikes disappeared into the distance. Real strength doesn't shout. It waits. The diner didn't return to normal right away. People stayed seated longer than usual, eyes drifting back to the corner table where Chuck sat quietly, finishing his coffee like nothing extraordinary had just happened. Conversations resumed, but they were different now. Lower, slower. Every few sentences circled back to the same moment. "Did you see how his arm didn't even move? That wasn't strength. That was something else, I swear." He looked bored. Phones buzzed softly as clips were replayed, zoomed in, slowed down. Some people laughed in disbelief. Others shook their heads, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The biker leader stood near the door with his crew, helmet in hand, staring out at the parking lot. The man who had walked in like he owned the place now looked thoughtful, grounded, stripped of performance. One of his guys leaned in. "You good?" he asked. The leader flexed his fingers slowly. "Just didn't expect that." None of them did. Before leaving, the leader glanced back one last time. Chuck met his eyes briefly and gave a small nod. No judgment, no challenge, just acknowledgement. Outside, engines started. This time, the roar didn't feel like a warning. It felt like an exit. As the bikes pulled away, dust settling behind them, the diner seemed to exhale. Chuck took another sip of coffee. It had gone cold, but he didn't mind. A young man approached hesitantly, phone lowered. "Sir," he said, "that was incredible." Chuck smiled faintly. "It was unnecessary," he said. The young man nodded, understanding more than he expected to. Minutes later, Chuck paid his bill, thanked the waitress, and stepped outside. The parking lot was quiet again. Just wind, asphalt, and fading tire tracks. He paused for a moment, looking down the road, then got into his truck and drove away. He didn't know the video was already spreading. By the time the sun dipped below the hills, clips from the diner were circulating online. Short segments at first, no context. Just an older man calmly absorbing brute force, then ending the match with effortless control. Comments poured in. "Who is this guy?" "That's Chuck Norris." "Are you kidding? Bro didn't even try." "This is what real strength looks like." Within hours, longer cuts appeared. Someone had filmed the entire interaction from the moment the bikers walked in. Another angle showed the leader's face as confusion turned into disbelief. Another caught the exact second control shifted. Martial artists slowed it down, pointing out wrist alignment, elbow placement, leverage. Ordinary viewers didn't care about the technique. They felt the lesson. Loud ego meets quiet mastery. The next morning, the video was everywhere. Reaction channels, commentary videos, headlines that barely mattered compared to the comment sections underneath. Respect isn't loud. He warned him. That's discipline. Some argued about whether it was staged. Others argued about whether it mattered. Most people didn't care either way. It felt true. Across the country, the biker leader sat at a kitchen table, phone in hand, watching the clip again. He didn't flinch this time. He watched closely, replaying the moment he realized he'd already lost. He posted a short message later that day. "I thought strength was about force. Learned something important yesterday." No excuses, no deflection. People respected that too. Weeks passed. The diner returned to being just a diner. But for those who were there, the memory never faded. They told the story the same way every time. He never raised his voice. He gave him chances. He didn't even look angry. And always the same ending. After that, the room just went quiet. Because that was the part that stuck. Not the slam, not the win, the silence, the moment when noise lost its power. Some challenges don't end with victory or defeat. They end with understanding. And sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is remain calm while the world pushes as hard as it can. The story didn't fade the way most viral moments do. It didn't burn bright for a day and disappear under the next distraction. Instead, it lingered. People kept coming back to it, not for the spectacle, but for the feeling it left behind. Comment sections filled with personal stories. I've been underestimated my whole life. I wish I'd had this kind of control when I was younger. This taught me more than any motivational video. Something about that quiet diner, that ordinary setting, made it feel reachable. This wasn't a stage, it wasn't a cage match, it wasn't a highlight reel built on explosions and noise. It was a place anyone could walk into. And that made the lesson hit harder. Late one evening, a waitress from the diner uploaded her own short clip. Not of the match, but of the aftermath. The empty table. The folded jacket. The untouched cup of coffee. Her caption was simple. He left like nothing happened. That post spread almost as fast as the original video. People talked about that detail more than anything else. He didn't stay to bask in attention. He didn't lecture. He didn't posture. He just left. That restraint became the real symbol of the moment. Somewhere else, in a gym miles away, a young man paused mid-workout while watching the clip on his phone. He lowered the weight, replayed the scene where Chuck absorbed the force without reacting. "That's it," he muttered. "That's what I'm missing." Across town, an older woman shared the video with her son, who struggled with anger. She didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. In another city, a martial arts instructor paused class and showed the clip on a screen, not to teach technique, but to teach mindset. "Watch his shoulders," the instructor said. "They're relaxed. He's not fighting. He's listening." Even people with no interest in fighting or strength felt drawn to it. Because deep down, it wasn't about arm wrestling. It was about pressure. About what happens when the world leans into you, doubts you, tests you, tries to provoke a reaction. Most people push back harder, some break, some explode. Very few stay calm. That was the difference. The biker leader understood that now, days later, he visited the diner again. Not with his crew, not with noise or engines, just him. He sat at the same table where it happened, ordered coffee, and stared at the surface for a long time. The waitress recognized him. She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Samey spot?" He nodded. When she set the cup down, he said something he hadn't expected to say. "Thank you." She smiled politely, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight behind it. He didn't post about that visit. No one filmed it, and that mattered. Some lessons only stick when no one is watching. Back on the road, Chuck continued on like he always had. He didn't reference the incident. He didn't comment on the attention. When asked about it briefly in an interview weeks later, he said only one sentence. "Control is quieter than ego." That was it. No elaboration. People clipped that line, shared it, printed it on images, argued over it, admired it. But the truth was already clear. Strength isn't proven in moments of comfort. It reveals itself under pressure. And real strength doesn't need to dominate a room to be felt. It can sit in the corner. It can sip coffee. It can wait. Because when the noise finally comes, when the challenge is unavoidable, when pride pushes too far, calm doesn't panic. It responds. And when it does, everything changes. The diner still stands on that stretch of highway. Most days, nothing happens there. Trucks come and go. Coffee gets poured. Life moves on. But every once in a while someone walks in, glances at the corner table, and asks quietly, "Is this where it happened?" And someone else nods. "Yeah," they say, "right there." Then they usually add the same thing. "He never raised his voice." Because that's what people remember. Not the strength. The restraint. And that may be the most powerful thing of all. Time moved on, as it always does. The diner's neon sign flickered on and off through changing seasons. Rain washed the asphalt clean. Snow once covered the same gravel lot where chrome had gleamed under the sun. New faces passed through. New stories unfolded, but the memory of that evening stayed anchored in the walls, in the worn tabletop, in the chair that still creaked the same way when someone leaned too far forward. People who hadn't been there spoke about it like a legend. People who had been there spoke about it like a reminder. They didn't exaggerate it. They didn't need to. They always described the same things: how quiet it got, how fast confidence vanished, how control felt heavier than force, and how, when it was over, there was no victory speech. No celebration, just calm. That detail mattered more with time, because the longer people thought about it, the clearer it became that the arm wrestling match wasn't the point at all. It was just the moment where everything else was revealed. The pressure, the ego, the assumptions. The difference between appearing powerful and actually being powerful. Some viewers watched the clip dozens of times, not because they enjoyed seeing someone lose, but because they were searching for something in Chuck's demeanor. The stillness, the patience, the absence of urgency. How does someone stay that calm? One comment read, "What does it take to not react like that?" Asked another, those questions lingered. They lingered in offices where voices were raised unnecessarily. They lingered in homes where arguments escalated too quickly. They lingered in moments where pride demanded a response. And slowly, subtly, the story did its work. A man chose not to argue back. A woman paused before reacting. Someone walked away instead of proving a point. Not because they were weak, because they understood something now, that not every challenge needs to be met head, and that not every provocation deserves an answer. That sometimes the strongest move is restraint. The biker leader carried that lesson with him longer than anyone knew. It changed the way he spoke to people, the way he entered rooms, the way he measured himself against others. He didn't stop being strong. He stopped needing to prove it. And that was the difference. Years later, someone would ask him about it, expecting a story about embarrassment or defeat. He would just shake his head and say, "Number, that was the day I learned something." And he'd answer simply, "There's a kind of strength you can't take. You can only earn it." Somewhere on a quiet road, Chuck continued living the way he always had. Training, learning, remaining disciplined in a world that constantly rewarded noise. He never chased the image people projected onto him. He never corrected them either. He didn't need to, because those who understood, understood, and those who didn't weren't ready yet. The diner remained just a diner. No plaque, no sign, no marker on the wall. The moment didn't need to be preserved in metal or words. It lived in people, in the way they stood a little calmer, in the way they chose restraint over reaction. Some challenges test strength. Others reveal character. And once in a while, a quiet moment in an ordinary place becomes a reminder the world didn't know it needed. That real power doesn't rush, it doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention. It waits. And when the moment comes, it speaks softly, and that is enough. The night eventually swallowed the road outside the diner. Headlights passed. Engines faded. The hum of ordinary life reclaimed the space where something extraordinary had briefly surfaced. If you walked in later, you wouldn't feel it right away. Just another place to stop. Just another table in the corner. Just another cup of coffee cooling too fast. But for those who understood, something had shifted. Because the lesson wasn't loud enough to announce itself. It didn't demand agreement. It didn't ask to be believed. It simply existed, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Pressure will always come. Ego will always test. Noise will always try to provoke a response. And most people will react, but some won't. Some will sit still while the world leans in. Some will breathe while others push. Some will choose restraint when force feels easier. That's the difference no camera can fully capture. Not the win, not the strength, the discipline. And long after the diner lights dimmed and the videos stopped trending, that quiet truth remained. Steady, patient, unshaken. Real strength doesn't chase recognition. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply shows up when it has to, does what's necessary, and leaves without a sound. Because in the end, the loudest thing in that diner wasn't the engines, the laughter, or the challenge. It was the silence that followed. And in that silence, everything was understood.